Hello, hello, hello. Check.
I know crying in my soul. Creator, I'm reaching out to you. Tell them on the other side that they are alive within my soul. Return their prayers that run through my veins. Return the land and heal her pain. The hidden truth. Tell the world the blues where it comes from. I'm going home. Going home. North Carolina is crying in my soul. Creator, I'm reaching out to you. Where the loose river runs through a land where my great-grandmother sleeps. Under the earth, blood of stirred, our nation was free. I hear Nigerian chains, they say are buried real deep. Tobacco fields, trail of tears, stolen people on stolen land. I'm going home, going home. North Carolina is crying in my soul. Creator, I'm reaching out to you. Tell them on the other side that they are alive within my soul. Return their prayers right through my veins. Return the land and heal her pain. The hidden truth. Tell the world the blues where it comes from. I'm going home. Going home. North Carolina is crying in my soul. Creator, I'm reaching out to you. Tell them that I know.
Down praying all for directions. Meditate with cactus, for the resurrection. Acceptance of life, self-love and meditation. Ascension of matter, rings of the Saturn. Burn the sweet grass and the ancestors gather. Some respect. Who knew the hoodoo, the ocean, the Zulu, the ayahuasca, Amazon, the witch doctor. Red earth's birth, white clay and eating dirt. Problem solving, green temple Corbin, pyramid building, black men evolving, microcosm, 30-day fast like work like a shaman, Afro-Peruvian, walking out of body, Machu Picchu, God is all inside of me, I'm in the galaxy. I keep it lit like sage, the Apollo, Sansu, light up place. Sage up. Sage up. I can hear it in the wind, this music is medicine, yeah. Sage up.
Yate, good morning. Thank you all for coming back. Those of you that joined us yesterday, and welcome to folks who are joining us today. We are just grateful for another day, for the learnings, and just in complete stillness right now of taking in everything. You know, yesterday was beautiful. I'll talk a little bit more about yesterday. And I wanted to just quickly introduce myself. So Yate in my language, hello. I see you with goodness and blessings. So I say that to you at this time on this beautiful day. We have snow coming down here in New Mexico, which is, I think that's why I'm talking about stillness, because watching the snow come down is making me feel just really calm. So my clans are Senegini, Hashlishni, Khanahni, and Betahni. I'm originally from Alugi, which is Butterfly Butte in St. Michael's, Arizona, currently here in the land of enchantment. I am your facilitative host. I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we get started. As you know, in our place, right, in the work that we do in our Indigenous communities, regardless if we're in an urban setting, we're on the res, we're in a hogan, or wherever we're doing our work, we always start off with connection and with prayer. And just for us to be grounded, for us to sync together, right, is just to kind of level set us all and in a good place, so that when we're in this space, that what needs to be sort of marinated within us and what we're learning, what we're hearing, we'll do good. So without further ado, I want to bring on a relative, Tim. He is going to say our prayer this morning and open our space. Tim?
Good morning. And my name is Timothy Nibukoyan. And if you will, bow your heads and let's talk to the Lord. Father, in the name of Jesus, I just ask you, Lord, to bless this gathering, Father, with the wisdom and the knowledge, Lord, to restore what you have given to all of us, Father, to promote health among our people, and to bring back the dignity that you had given to us. And we thank you, Father, for you are the one who owns all of the wisdom and knowledge, Father. And I just ask you, Lord, to lead and guide all of the talkers today. Bless them with wisdom and knowledge and inspire them, Lord, to speak in such a way, Lord, that it would inspire people to help one another, that we may promote those who need good health, Father. We thank you, Lord, for all that you've done. We thank you, Father, for the wonderful blessings that you've given to us. And we thank you, Father, that you are our God and we are your children. In Jesus' precious holy name we pray. Amen. And today I would like to lead in a flute song. So today, just close your eyes and meditate on things of peace, and let's take a journey together. Thank you.
Tim, Ayahat from my language. Thank you. That was beautiful. Appreciate it. Thank you. You're getting some love in the chat, so just thank you for that. And I just like everyone at this time just to take a deep breath. And when you take your deep breath, I'd like you to hold for 4 seconds and exhale to breathe in the beautiful prayer and the music that came along with that. So let's take a deep breath together. Here we go. Thank you. As I had said earlier, welcome back to those beautiful souls who joined us yesterday. Ayahat for joining us again today. And we want to welcome the new attendees. Thank you for being with us today. We are so grateful that you can join us today. I just want to acknowledge, and if you can use the chat, this is your opportunity to shout out who you represent. I know we have a range of folks from all over in terms of what you do, the different forms of discipline, and clearly with interests of the Indigenous, food sovereignty movement. So if you put in the chat, who are you shouting out to? Like, is it your field? Are you a researcher? Are you a tribal leader? Are you representing a youth organization? Just put it in the chat box. We want to see what disciplines are here with us. And you can just say, I am a community member interested in this. So put it in there. And we want to do a special shout out and welcome the students from the University of Winnipeg Department of Indigenous Studies. So we're giving you a shout out. So please do that. We would love to see who's all here in terms of who you are representing. Shout out to all the Indigenous chiefs. Yes. Beautiful. I'm part of the education on Native Education Department. Wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. Just giving shout outs to folks. I appreciate that. Thank you. And we know that we have folks from all over and different forms of discipline. So welcome. So today is our second day and our final day of our virtual Indigenous Food Sovereignty and Health Symposium. And as I had introduced myself earlier, my role yesterday and today is really going on this journey with you. I am learning just as much as you are. I am listening with my whole heart as much as you are. And I'm really just sort of co-harvesting with you. So I'm here as your host facilitator, just making sure things are rolling and they're flowing, and conscientious of time, as so we want to get through and make sure all of our speakers share the wisdom that they have to offer. And I'm here to hold space to remind you to get up, right? To listen to our body. Part of this is about our health and our body. And we've gotten so disconnected from listening to our body. And so today I'm going to challenge you to really do a body scan, to every now and then notice if your shoulders are tight, if you're holding your breath, get up, try to listen to what your body's saying. Maybe your body wants more water. So I'm here to hold space with you, and also to make sure that even though I can't see you, that I can feel you, right? So that's my role, to facilitate the presenters and keeping things rolling, to hold space, but also in the end to co-harvest, like a pinon tree. When all the piñons come down, let's pick and see what we learned from our individuals who have shared their wisdom. So with that, get my glass of water. Yesterday was, I would love people to put in the chat box, if you were to put one word, hashtag yesterday, if you were here yesterday, hashtag a word, I feel like hashtag amazing, hashtag eye-opening, like just, hashtag deep thought for me. And I'm still sitting with a lot from yesterday. I think what really struck me yesterday was, it made me think about my own family, like my children, because youth was a common theme in the conversation yesterday. And so we had several things going on yesterday. So we had an amazing keynote speaker from a day. We had panelists from actual practitioners, people who are on the ground doing this work, sharing what they're doing. And that was Taylor and Jane. And then we, at the end, had another speaker who had shared sort of from a youth perspective as well, Electa. And you can find all their bios and their information in the bio page that's on the website. So they were amazing. It went by so fast. It was breathtaking. So as I was sort of leaning towards what were some common threads yesterday with all the speakers, right? With all the speakers, there were some really key threads with all of them. One of them is really how each, individual had honored sort of our ancestors, our elders, our teachers, our knowledge keepers, and our youth. They really somehow or another always, gave recognition and shout outs to those individuals, and also how continuing to want to learn with them, right? They also talked about language. And it's interesting because language came from a different perspective in terms of like when using it, speaking it, but defining and redefining it, sharing our stories, that there's no new ideas. There's similarities between a lot of our communities. We all have a role in this and really need to be thinking about our children and our future. So those were some common threads, but some of the things that really I harvested, the opinions I picked were like, that we need to be listening more to the plants and to the animals, that we need to take charge for our own community, and that the division of labor and regardless of what we do in our community, it's for all. It's not just for one, right? Health is an individual responsibility. And how are we responding to our community needs was also something that struck me as we're listening. I appreciated also a couple of speakers had mentioned data and data gathering, like who's sharing this data, who's blessing the data, is the data correct, and how it's representing our communities. I loved one of the speakers had said, like, this is not new in terms of food sovereignty and how we're doing this work, but it's been disrupted. So it's not new, but it's been disrupted from outside influences. I thought that was really interesting. One other thing was the interconnection, right? The interconnection with the forest, the land, the water. And then just sort of questioning. I like how this other individual talked about we need to be questioning, like, if we're going to be incorporating new practices in our community, like farming or whatever, are we able to do that given, like, are we getting enough water? How's it affecting other sort of natural resources? Creating our own narrative. And the largest underscore, I think, from all of them was the youth, our future. We really need to, have them engage. We need to hear their voice. We need to have them also in leadership roles so that we're also kind of mentoring them. So I wanted to just give high level just yesterday. That was probably, I'm not doing it justice, and I'm hoping you all are helping me by putting in the chat hashtag what you took away from it, what was your learning. So again, just thanking our funders, our partners, and the planning committee members who are all noted here. So if we can move to the next, thank you. All right, so some general housekeeping that we want to remind folks about. And, I always say you would think that being on, a virtual platform for, in our third year of this pandemic, that we would all be pros. And as you know, technology has its own course of how things go. So I ask, first of all, that you give us some grace, as we're moving things along and trying to keep things flowing. Things happen. And so when that does, to be patient with us, to give us that grace to respond to you and help meet your needs. So I want you to know that you are all muted. However, the chat function is there for you to engage with one another and also to engage with us. There are two functionalities here that I want you to pay attention in how we're communicating and connecting. I just mentioned the chat, which you all are doing a beautiful job in also sharing, right? So that's wonderful. That's sort of like the hangout, like we're at a real life conference, right? We're at the table. That's kind of what that is. The Q&A is on another part of the screen at the bottom. Think of that as, when we're at a conference and then there's a mic and everybody says, if you have a question, go to the mic. Think of that Q&A as that. Like we're at an in-person conference and you have a question after our speakers have talked, go to the Q&A, go to the mic and write your question. The reason why I'm pointing these out is with the Q&A, it is helpful. It's easier for us to navigate and see what are real specific questions to our speakers or to us logistically. The chat is we're all hanging out at the table talking and you're just keeping things flowing. Yesterday it was beautiful. People were also putting in resources. So that's a place where you're networking and you're providing resources. So use the chat for that. And folks can copy and paste what they want in the chat. But the Q&A, think about it as going to the mic and asking for questions, all right? So I wanted to bring up those two things. The other thing for folks to keep in mind about the functionalities below is the live transcript. If you see the live transcript, when I look at my computer, it's on my far right. When you click on that, you can put full view transcript. And what that allows for you to do, when you click on that, a window will pop up and it will literally be transcribing us verbatim. So if you need that, that is there. You can use that functionality. Okay. What else do I want to say? Oh, this is recorded. So this symposium yesterday was recorded. Today is recorded. Once we're done with the symposium and, we get everything together, they will post this on the website. So, keep checking on it. So then, at some point you will see both days recorded. And you will also, the other thing I wanted to remind you all is the survey. Thank you. Beautiful. Is to also, do the survey when you get a chance, though, if they'll put it in the Dropbox, but we'll try to remind you again at the end of the day. And a couple of things before I talk about today, just self-care, water, get up, stretch. I'm going to remind us for deep breaths throughout the day. All your cameos are welcome. Your family, your friends, your pets. Yesterday we had an older dog. One of the guest speakers was talking, and it was so cute. And everybody's trying to figure out who was snoring. And then they found out it was the dog. The dog was snoring. So all dogs, cats are welcome. And just have fun, have a good time. All right. So we are going to transition to the first part of our morning and spend some time here. I'm excited about hearing from several folks. And what this next section is called lightning talks. And who you see here is our beautiful Cassandra Nikolaus. And she will be moderating the lightning talks. And just a couple of tidbits about her. She is a first generation college student and the first in her family to earn a graduate degree. I think that's a lot to just give acknowledgement and celebration to, and just amazing when we see a lot of our Native people pursuing that. She has had formal training in human nutrition and also promoting healthy behaviors. And so there's kind of three areas of her work in terms of her interests and really what she is trying to focus on. One is revitalization of local food systems to increase diet quality and well-being among Native communities and families. So that's number one. Number two, integration of food insecurity screening into healthcare services to better address chronic diseases. And number three, advancement in charitable food systems to increase equality and empowerment of clients. So that's a beautiful vision, beautiful area of interest that she is. Her long-term goal is really just sort of bridging the gap between what do we know and what do we do about food insecurity. So, Dr. Nikolaus, you're up. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki, for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone who's joined us today for day 2 of the symposium. It's really a pleasure to be here. As Vicki shared, my name is Cassandra Nikolaus, and my role is as a research assistant professor at Washington State University. And at Washington State, I work within the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health, where we really focus on community health outreach and research in partnership with American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. And my background, my educational background, is really rooted in human nutrition. I spent 9 years earning my bachelor's, master's, and finally my PhD within the discipline of nutrition. However, as I learned more about what and why behind which foods were healthy, my focus and area of work has really narrowed onto the how. And when I say how, I specifically mean how we can make healthy and culturally relevant foods accessible, affordable, and appealing. And it is with this lens that I bring to my work that I can say that I'm truly delighted to have the unique privilege to moderate the session for today and for our series of lightning talks. I've been fortunate to have learned from, and more specifically to have been inspired by, several of our panelists through conversations, partnerships, and in reading their published work over the past several years. And so I'm confident that attendees and those who also listen to the recording will also be inspired to hear from each of these speakers, who are touching on a variety of topics related to how food sovereignty is being implemented and assessed. So we will begin with a discussion of interventions and initiatives that are conducted within the Center of Indigenous Health Research and Policy, which is our gracious host for this 2-day symposium. And then we'll have an opportunity to hear about the Baltimore context, followed by an outdoor learning center that's located in Cherokee Nation Reservation. And then we'll finish up with an exploration of economic considerations of initiatives. So as the lightning name implies, each speaker is going to be covering their topics very briefly in a 15-minute format. So I want to give each speaker as much time as possible to share with us. And so I've kept my kind of introductory remarks really short. However, I do want to quickly provide some brief housekeeping notes. We'll be following each of these 15-minute sessions with a brief 5-minute question and answer format. So it's really important for any questions that you think of for the speakers to enter those into the Q&A feature in Zoom and entering them as you think of them live so they're ready to be queued up at the end of each speaker's session. If you don't have any questions, but if you're monitoring the Q&A, you can use the upvote feature, which looks like a little thumbs up, to indicate which questions you'd like to see answered live. And I'll be working to keep us on time to ensure that we're respectful of everyone's schedules. So if we can't answer all of the questions that we get, and if yesterday was any indication, we'll probably have more questions than we can answer in our 5-minute time periods. We can go ahead and try and facilitate sending those to our speakers for consideration after today's live session. So with this, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tonya Wapskineh. And Tonya is the Senior Research Director for the Center for Indigenous Health Research and Policy at Oklahoma State University. And she'll be sharing with us the work that's being conducted within the center to intervene and implement initiatives in the food environment in various contexts. So with that, Tonya, I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. CL Nagai, Tonya Wapskineh Dawadon. Hi, everyone. My name is Tonya Wapskineh. I am Cherokee, I am Prairie Band Potawatomi, Creek, and Seminole. And before I begin, I just kind of wanted to give an acknowledgement to Cherokee Nation. Before coming to the center, I worked there for 17 years, almost 17 years, and I worked with wonderful partners throughout Oklahoma and throughout the United States in diabetes prevention efforts. And from that work, I realized how important our food was and how our food is medicine. And then also the importance of going back to what we originally ate and our learning our language and culture within that context. And so it made coming over to the center and working on food sovereignty issues even more desirable because it's something that I'm really interested in. So I just started with the center in December. So please bear with me through this. I'm still learning. And for all the partners that we work with, if I leave something out or I may not present as well as I should, please forgive me and please understand that I am still learning and I do respect everything that has been done so far. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start talking. So this is about the Osage Community Supported Agriculture Study. We were just funded last fall and we are in year 1 of implementation. All right, so it is important to talk about the history of why we're doing this. It is a partnership between Osage Nation, Harvest Land Farm, and our center, and it is a continuation of the FRESH grants. The FRESH grant actually started in 2015, and it builds upon an 8-year community-based participatory research partnership. Osage Nation, they were interested in promoting food sovereignty. They wanted to create a healthy food system that would be sustainable, and they knew that this project would be something that would promote health. They, as you can see in the map below, the area that's circled, that's where Osage Nation is located. And if you were here yesterday, Dr. Jan Heyman, she gave a great presentation on what they're currently doing there at the farm. And one of the things that I found to be really significant to all this work is a quote from Dr. Redcorn. He's the Osage Nation Assistant Principal Chief. And it is, finally, we have a way to do what we did 200 years ago, and it's feed our own people, which is a beautiful concept. And I think it's something that a lot of people have realized, especially through the pandemic and having to resource food and then feed our tribal members, feed our tribal elders, and having to go outside of our own boundaries to get that food. So I think that having food security is on the forefront of everybody. And I think it's really evident, especially within our of what we're talking about today, because there's so many people that have been interested and have joined us. So I thank you all for being here and wanting to learn more about this. So before beginning any kind of Indigenous food sovereignty effort, I think it's really important to think about what you're wanting to learn, what that means to you. What does that mean to you, your family, your community, your organization, the people that you work with. And these are some definitions I thought were really helpful for me, especially being new in this field, is that it is a right and responsibility of Indigenous people to have this, and it is something that we've been doing for a really long time, and there has been a disconnection between our food and where we are today. So the FRESH study is a multi-level, multi-component intervention that was done. It aimed to develop a culturally relevant study that tracked changes in child dietary intake, BMI, and parents' blood pressure. And what it did was it used produce, fresh food, coming from the farm, and it supplied food to the tribal Head Starts. So on the environment policy level, it helped. It used the Bird Creek Farm, which is now called Harvest Lands. And then on the school community level, it created curriculum for teachers to implement. And then the staff feeding processes, there were trainings that were held in healthy ways to feed kids in groups. And then menu changes, the Head Start menus were changed to include vegetables from Bird Creek Farms. And then there was the component of passive intervention with family. There were web-based curriculum on tips and strategies on how to promote healthy eating with the young ones, and then also monthly family nights. And regarding to the findings, this is still being worked on. There's still data analysis that is happening now, and there's more outcomes than that are still being done and looked at. But one of the things that you can see is that there were positive effects on child intake as well as on food insecurity. And then they also found a huge success because it was such the ability to show that Native communities can affect change by creating more sustainability in their food systems. And not only is it just present day, but it does have long-term effects on health for future generations, which are far beyond the goal of the study. So from the FRESH study, then it kind of expanded, and there's new next steps, which I'll be getting into. But this is a picture of the center with the leadership at Osage Nation. They were able to triple the usage of acres in food production. They used the data to advocate for policy. They were featured on PBS in a series called Blood Sugar Rising. And then they were featured in a journal, Nature, for their community-based participatory research approach. And then the next steps are the CSA. So that leads to the Osage Community Supported Agriculture Initiative. So the purpose of it is to implement a new community supported agriculture program in which Osage citizens will receive a weekly share of freshly grown farm produce to improve diet and health. So the way that we're going to do this is we have to really think about the significance of it all. So diet and health, we all know that poor diet is linked to higher risk and greater severity of multiple diseases that affect American Indians. And then also food systems and health as in regards to food production, access, and marketing. And then there are a few studies that examine food, health systems, and health in American Indian and Alaska Native communities. And then I need to mention the Center's Thrive study. If you don't have information on this, you can come to our website, which is indigenoushealth.com, I believe. I'm going to have to ask somebody to put that into the in the chat box, and you can find different papers that were done from the Thrive study, and that was done with Chickasaw Nation, I believe. So, and then the next one is food systems intervention. So this is the conceptual model that we're going to be using. It's a multi-level ecological framework. You have to take into fact individual level factors that impact food choices, and this is through characteristics of self-efficacy, outcome, expectations, and behavioral capability. And then you have to look at environmental factors that include social, physical, and macro level environments. And then what we hypothesize is that the CSA intervention will improve diet and health outcomes through the pathway that is partially mediated by self-efficacy, patient activation, food security, community efficacy, and cultural connection. So this is what our design style looks like. It's going to be randomized. Like I said, year one, we're just in the planning year. We're just getting started. We have some really great staff that just came on board, and I'm really excited to work with them. And then in years 2 and 3, what we propose is that we're going to recruit 600 American Indian adults that live on the Osage Reservation, and we'll be working with them. We'll be collecting baseline data, and then they'll be randomized into 2 different groups. One will be the intervention group, the other will be in the control group. And those that are in the control group, when the actual evaluation is done, then they'll also receive the CSA food boxes. So it's not like they're going to be in and then we, don't do anything, but they're also going to have the ability to receive the same amount of the intervention when the study is over. So right now we're preparing to figure out how that's going to look. And with that said, we've had great discussions on how we can make these methodologies more Indigenous, finding those Indigenous pioneers and research team that can do that, and then also help in the way that we look at things like decolonizing data or making our efforts more concentrated on tradition and culture. So these are the CSA boxes and curriculum. In the curriculum, we're going to be focusing on providing recipes that are in the Osage language, also food origin stories, and then trying to look at traditional foods and what is offered at the Harvest Land Farm. And then we're also going to include information that's cultural, and then also provide language. So one of the things that I did want to talk about on this slide in particular is that we're using principles of Indigenous food sovereignty. So there's 4 of them that we use, and it's one is sacred gift. Food is a sacred gift from Creator, and Indigenous people have sacred responsibility to one another, the land, the water, plants, and animals that provide us with food. And then the next one is participation. Sovereignty can only be realized fully through active community participation in Indigenous food-related activities on a day-to-day basis. So it's something that we always have to do every day. The next one, the third one, is self and community efficacy, individuals being self-reliant to respond to our health needs so that they can care for the collective health and well-being of our community. So it's not just looking at ourselves, but also the community as a whole. And then legislation and policy is the 4th principle, which includes a balanced approach to addressing structures and power in the policy planning and governance of Indigenous homelands and food systems. And pictured here on the left is Dr. Jernigan. She's the PI on this study. And then on the right are members of the Harvest Land staff. All right, so the second aim of our study is the economic evaluation. So we are going to be looking at the cost effectiveness and cost benefit, and not only just for the organization or for the farm, but also the individual and then the community level. So we're going to look at the improvement in health-related quality of life, which we all know is reducing medical cost and cost effectiveness on clinical improvements. And then we're going to take into account the programmatic costs for personnel time and material costs and put that together. And then the participant costs would be time and effort spent to obtain the CSA boxes, learn new recipes, and then we'll be able to show the difference between receiving the CSA boxes and the reduction in grocery costs. And then our third aim is to document all of this and then disseminate it. So we're going to be sharing these findings using participatory video methods and developing a web-based toolkit. And then we're going to be partnering with NCAI and other local and national partners to disseminate this toolkit. And this is my final slide. I think I went through that really quickly. When she said lightning, I was like, okay, here we go. So tribal food sovereignty. I really like this. There wasn't really a person, I think it just came from the center, and it was just something that was, a collective view on it, and I like to read that. The right for Indigenous nations to define their own diets and shape food systems that are congruent with their spiritual and cultural values. And I think that says a lot about what we do and what you all are doing in your communities. And with that, I give you all much gratitude and respect, because it is a lot of work, and you do have the vision, and it does take a lot of passion. So I'm very thankful to be in this line of work, and I hope that through this, I can meet some great new partners and people that are doing this work as well. So thank you very much. Well,
Thank you, Tonya. Thank you so much for that great presentation. It's incredible to see how the kind of initial FRESH project has grown into the CSA, and to partner with Osage's initiatives is just incredible. So I have a couple questions that have been entered into the Q&A, and we do have 5 minutes to kind of get to answer those. For those that have questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. And then for those that are interested in hearing certain questions, please feel free to use the upvote feature, which looks like a little thumbs up under each of those questions to indicate which ones you're most interested in seeing answered. So I'm going to go ahead and read one that has been upvoted. And this was a question submitted by Izzy Smith. And they ask, can you share some highlights of the curriculum for grade school students, or something that is special to you with youth?
That is a great question. Since I am new and I wasn't actually working on FRESH, I don't have that information. However, there are people on the panel that could give you this information. I don't know if they can share their Dr. Jernigan or Maggie. Do you guys have this information?
Yeah, maybe they can share their thoughts in the chat. We can see if they have kind of some resources that they can share. But while they're thinking about that, I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question, which is from Salvador Gonzalez. And they ask, for items that are not grown locally and included in the CSA boxes, do you gauge the producers to understand the growing and labor practices behind those sourced foods?
That would actually be also a question with Harvest Land, and with me just starting in on this work. I do think that those are conversations that we need to have, because I think there's a strong interest in what is produced and what that looks like and how it can be done using Indigenous agriculture methods. So we haven't actually started on that part as far as with the food boxes for CSAs. That will be done in year 2. So I'd be happy to share that information once we do it.
Great, thank you. I also wanted to ask a question that was submitted kind of early. It might be simple, and that is from Allie Anderson. And they ask, are these principles written on any slides? And I believe this is in reference to the 4 principles you spoke to with that great photo of Dr. Jernigan smiling with the CSA. Are those written or published somewhere that you might be able to refer folks to?
They actually, they're not on the slide, and I wanted to put that on there. And I see where Valarie, she just posted something in the chat box. It was something that it was included in our grant to NIH, and I thought it was really beautiful and something that we're trying to use as the basis of our research. So if you follow that link, you'll be able to find it.
Great, thank you. And so then I'm going to ask another question that was asked by an anonymous attendee. And they ask, are there principles, or give me a second, are there plans to bring together these efforts with seasonal or traditional or spiritual ceremony?
That's a great question as well. We are working with Osage Nation, and one of the things that I know about working with communities, and where I came from was, Cherokee, and I'm Cherokee. So it was a very good experience to see the differences in communities and how they work and different viewpoints just within my own tribe. So with me being, new in Osage Nation, having their own traditions and cultures, that would be something that they would see as a need or see as something that they want to do, because we assist them, we help, but it's not something that we can really tell them what to do. We can suggest things that may work if they have those questions. So we really give the ownership to Osage Nation to see what they want to do and what they want to have within their community, and to really think about the needs of their community. What does their community want? What does that look like?
It sounds like a really strong partnership, which is so great to hear. So I think with that, we have one more question that I think that we'll go ahead and be able to ask. So this was a question submitted by George Zeno, and they ask, how should universities enter this conversation with interested tribes who are ready to collaborate to begin this kind of journey?
So, okay, how should universities? I think it would be up to the communities to reach out to universities. I don't know if universities really would be the ones to reach out to communities unless they know those communities or they already have a partnership with them. I do think it's important for the communities to be the ones to want that information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, having it community led. So thank you so much again, Tonya. I really appreciate you sharing this with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and switch us over to our next presentation from Tara. Thank you. So I, again, want to just speak to the pleasure that I have to introduce our next speaker, Tara Maudrie. Tara has been a collaborator with us in our group that Dr. Jernigan mentioned very briefly yesterday, the iChanges group that's based out of Washington State University that has brought together many collaborators from academic to community to student. And when I first met Tara, she was a master's student, has since received her master's and is now in a PhD program at Johns Hopkins, is doing incredible work and is a rising kind of already a colleague, but rising scholar in the area of urban food sovereignty and food security. So I want to give her as much time to talk about her work and her vision for the future. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away from here. Thank you, Tara. And hopefully everybody can welcome her in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassandra. Hello and welcome, everyone. As Cassandra mentioned, my name is Tara Maudrie, and I'm here today to share a bit of a story with you. This story is just one small piece of the Baltimore Native community's story. Their story includes struggles, challenges, and resilience as they assert themselves in a city determined to ignore their presence. And of course, their food system struggles are no different. Before we go any further, though, I'd like to offer a brief land acknowledgement that may differ just slightly from other ones you may have heard. As we gather today from across Turtle Island, we acknowledge that all land is Indigenous land, and all cities are Indigenous cities. This land and these cities have sustained the well-being of Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. We have a responsibility to the lands and the cities which we call home. We recognize the colonial histories in these cities and celebrate the survivance exemplified by urban and rural Native communities across Turtle Island. I also like to set an intention before I give any sort of storytelling or research presentation. So I just wanted to share with you today that my intention is one of co-learning. I know there's a lot of really, really wonderful people here today, and I'm excited to share what I know with you and to learn from all of you. If anybody would also like to share their intention, you're welcome to either keep it to yourself or you can also drop that in the chat. I know I'd love to read them later. Okay. In the spirit of Indigenous structures of accountability and the history of qualitative research reflexivity, I'm going to take a brief moment to introduce myself in my traditional language, and by doing so, I hope you'll understand a small piece of my own story. Uju Mishkwa Nungukwain Indigenakas Manatiang Nindojaba Mishiki and Dudam. Greetings, my relatives. My English name, as I've mentioned, is Tara Maudrie, and I'm an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. I am Snapping Turtle Clan, and I am named in my language as Red Star Woman. I grew up near where the river bends, or what we now call Detroit, Michigan. I've been an urban Native person my whole life and consider Detroit to be my home community. My bachelor's degree is in exercise science from Oakland University, and I have lived in Baltimore, Maryland for the past 2.5 years, where I did my master's of science in public health in the human nutrition program at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which is just a really fancy way to say that I really like food. And I am currently a PhD student in the Social and Behavioral Interventions program at Johns Hopkins, and I work with the Johns Hopkins Center for American Indian Health. Through my clan role and my professional role as a researcher, I fulfill a sacred responsibility in my communities by keeping and telling stories of Native communities and their health. While I may be sharing with you the results and findings from one of my research projects, I hope that by viewing this as a story, you will understand the transformative power that storytelling has for our communities, and understand that when we listen to the stories of community food systems, our focus changes from one of immediate response to one of understanding. In order to support community food sovereignty, we must listen with the intention of deep understanding rather than the intention of immediate response. On this slide, you'll see photos of me with community members. My advisor is in the kind of middle upper next to my dog. And in the bottom right, those are the strong women in my family. So I just wanted to share that. The Baltimore Native community is a small community compared to some other urban Native communities. Those identifying as American Indian alone or American Indian and Alaska Native in a combination with one or more race make up less than 1% of the general population in the Baltimore service area. Despite the presence of Native people in Baltimore City for hundreds of years, several factors contribute to the invisibility of American Indian and Alaska Native people in Baltimore City. One of these factors is a poor racial data collection usage of the city of Baltimore, which we'll kind of get into in just a second. And another is the white gaze of academia, which promotes stereotypes and tropes of Native people that are farther away while ignoring the urban Native people in their own city. And lastly, the multiracial identities of Native people are extremely important in many urban Native communities, but particularly Baltimore City, where Afro-Indigenous identities are very, very common. And then Baltimore is served by Native American Lifelines, which is an urban Indian health program, which at this time consists of 7 full-time staff who provide outreach and referral care. I moved to Baltimore in fall of 2019, and I quickly became involved with the Baltimore Native community through powwows, feasts, Indigenous Peoples Day celebrations, all those sorts of good things, and also through spending time at the local urban Indian health program, Native American Lifelines. And through spending time with this community and listening to community members, it became very clear that food security is a major issue for many of our community members. I was able to talk to Native American Lifeline staff, and they were like, yep, food security has been an issue here for a very long time. Let's do something about this. So I was able to get a very small amount of funding through my school, through the Urban Health Institute, to do a research study about food security and food sovereignty. So I used a community-based participatory research approach, very similar to what we just talked about a second ago, to work with Native American Lifelines to develop a research plan that utilized mixed methods, meaning that I used both qualitative and quantitative approaches to data collection to document the prevalence of food insecurity, but also to understand the lived experiences of those who are struggling with food insecurity, and also to kind of talk to this community about food security has been an issue here for a long time. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to move forward? And then shortly after I got this funding, the pandemic hit, which I think, as all of us recognize, makes everything a lot more complicated, especially research. And so throughout the pandemic, community food security was really, really threatened. Unemployment rates rose across the city, and particularly in Baltimore City, where there's a lot of what we call here in Baltimore as healthy food priority areas. A lot of grocery store shortages really hit different areas of the city inequitably, so it caused a lot of issues. And then further on the second bullet, you'll notice that Baltimore City, for the first, I think it was 4 or 5 months of COVID, only collected COVID data as Black, white, or other, which further contributes to the invisibility of urban Native people and or other relatives like Asian Americans. So as this happened, Baltimore Native Lifelines was expecting to receive federal funding to support COVID-19 efforts, so they rapidly conducted a community needs assessment, and overwhelmingly people said, we need food. We can't get food at the store, we need food. So I worked with Native American Lifelines, and I was also in my master's in nutrition, so it's good to apply that knowledge and be able to help them to develop food relief boxes. So we plan to include traditional foods, healthy foods, things like can openers, strainers to rinse those canned foods in case people were living off those to reduce sodium content. And funders came back and said that due to federal restrictions, grant money could not be spent on food. And so I just want to pause for a moment and emphasize how heartbreaking it is to have your community members say, we need food, and to not be able to feed them with the little funding that you have. But something good happened, and the good thing that happened was a Black-led food sovereignty movement in Baltimore called Bliss Meadows reached out and distributed produce boxes to feed our community. This was such an amazing show of solidarity and kinship from the Black community, and I personally cannot express how grateful I am to them for feeding our community when we weren't able to ourselves. During this time, I worked with Native American Lifelines to reimagine and redevelop our research plan to fit COVID-19 times. And luckily during that time, I was able to gather increased funding to gather more data. This final study included 2 phases. So the first was a quantitative survey of 250 American Indian and Alaska Native adults. And that survey included food insecurity, demographics, COVID hardships, a bunch of other things. And then the second phase was in-depth interviews with a subset of participants to really dig into what are people's experiences with food insecurity as an urban Native person in Baltimore, and also what do they think the solution to these problems are. We found a number of things, and I'll just briefly highlight some of the main things. First of all, we found 32% food insecurity prevalence, which is higher than the Baltimore City average, and also just to take a moment, that's like 1/3 of the community that's really not getting enough food, and that's a really heartbreaking number. So I want to emphasize that sometimes numbers, you'll get 32%, you don't think that's that high, but it's kind of a lot when you think about it. And we also found through the quantitative survey a lot of things that a lot of us would think of as common sense. So food insecurity is associated with lower income, lower educational attainment, decreased access, or living in a healthy food priority area. All those sorts of things kind of showed up in the survey. So none of these are really surprising to us. But I think what was more interesting was what came out of the qualitative work. So in the qualitative work, people really talked about that the mainstream definitions of food security didn't capture their experience as an Indigenous person. People said that the term socially acceptable, which is often used in a lot of food security definitions, was confusing and also a bit of a struggle to understand. People said that socially acceptable to them might be foraging, or it might be if you hit a deer with your car, taking that deer, getting it processed and eating it because it's venison and that's important to us. But they said that in Baltimore, that's really not a socially acceptable way to get food. And so that definition didn't really fit what they thought. They also talked about mainstream definitions of food security really considered, do you have enough food to live a healthy life? And a healthy life from a Western perspective might mean that you have enough calories in your diet to survive or to be healthy. But from an Indigenous person's perspective, that might be having access to your cultural and traditional foods that are really important to your mental and spiritual health and your identity. They also talked about safety of foods. People talk about foods being safe. And normally I think as a nutrition student, we think of safe foods as something that's not going to give you food poisoning. But safe foods as an Indigenous person also means that these foods were grown in a good way. And we're growing out our heirloom seeds and really honoring our connections to these foods and keeping these foods safe, not just for our sake, but for the sake of the food. And then the other finding, which is kind of actually what my dissertation will hopefully be on, is that almost every single person I interviewed mentioned that even if they were no longer food insecure, they still had profound and lasting impacts of food insecurity on their mental health relationships to food. So people expressed that they didn't know how to connect to their bodies when they were eating, saying that they would either overeat or undereat, and they found themselves really restricting or overeating foods. And they showed examples of when they were children, growing up, there might be different benefit cycles. It's a little bit better now, but, their family would get a ton of food one time a month, and their family would say, you need to eat everything on your plate. And then even if they were already full. And so they say that kind of carried with them into adulthood, where they still feel the need to finish every food on their plate. So I think the point we're trying to make here with this one is that food insecurity isn't just about not having enough food. It has really profound impacts on people's mental and spiritual health and their connections to food. People also talked about how they long to have access to their traditional foods. And here in Baltimore City, I mean, you can go to Whole Foods and buy bison. Bison's not one of my traditional foods, but you could, but it's, $11 a pound. Like, who can afford that, especially if you're food insecure? And so people said that they really longed for traditional foods, but when they got access to them, they were almost scared to use them because they weren't sure when they were going to have them again. So people described, going back to visit their family on the reservation in the Southwest and bringing back a particular type of beans and just having them sit on their shelves for months because they were so scared because they weren't going to get them again. So I just want to also emphasize that cultural food security is something to explore as well. All right. And then the last part of the interviews really explored what people think of as food sovereignty for the Baltimore Native community, which is what I was most excited to learn about. And the Baltimore Native community really conceptualized food sovereignty in a way that I wasn't familiar with. And I think it makes a lot of sense, but I think having done so much reading and working with my auntie Shiloh, she worked on a food sovereignty initiative in Detroit. I worked with her before I started my master's. It's a different way of conceptualizing it. And what they really spoke to is they talked about food sovereignty as a way that they are cared for and a way they care for their kin. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. This is a way that, and I think it really comes from the fact that the Black community has fed the Baltimore Native community in a time when we couldn't feed our own community members. And so it's really not about being totally self-reliant as a community, but knowing that there's other communities out there that we can support and that can support us, and we can trade our gifts back and forth. So I think that was a really beautiful way in which we can use our kinship ties to land and to food and to other communities to help our own communities achieve our food goals. And then lastly, food sovereignty. I think everybody kind of knows this. Food sovereignty isn't a dichotomy. People aren't fully food sovereign or fully not. It's really a spectrum. People are on their journeys to food sovereignty as our communities. And so for an urban Native community that has limited resources, that might mean for now, we need to partner with other communities, or we need to partner with other organizations to get our community fed. And that's okay, because we're working on moving towards that. And as previously alluded to, and I talked about a lot, food security is a really major concern for this community, and solutions to addressing food insecurity should really be critically examined to ensure that they're compatible with community priorities and that specific communities and how that specific community conceptualizes food sovereignty. So right now, just as a little update, I'm working with a local nonprofit to work on getting produce boxes that can be delivered to Baltimore community members. So this is all in the works. We're working on it, but I'm excited to continue this urban native food system work throughout my PhD. And I want to go back one. I also just wanted to offer some acknowledgements. The Baltimore Native community really has welcomed me with open arms and hearts since I moved here, and I'm most appreciative of them, as well as the participants of the study, Native American Lifelines, and of course the many people that make me who I am today. So that includes my many mentors, including Cassandra, Valarie, my auntie Shiloh, my own family. So I just also want to offer that I'm not self-made, I am community made, and I am made of a wonderful network of people. So I really want to acknowledge all the people who have made me who I am and have given me the skills to do this work for this community. And I think I'm going to stop there and ask for questions. I also have my email on the slide. Please, I would love to talk with more people. I'm a very social person, so please reach out if you have questions.
Thank you, Tara, so much for your presentation. And I want to invite all of our attendees to share their appreciation in the chat and their comments, which I see many people thanking you and talking about how amazing this work is in the chat. I also want to invite anyone who has a question specifically for Tara to enter that into the Q&A feature so that she might be able to answer that live. I'm just seeing my chat kind of stream past. So thank you everybody for welcoming and thanking Tara into this space. So I just want to say thank you for myself for sharing this story. As you mentioned, it was heartbreaking to hear, yet so inspiring to see kind of where it is going and where it is. I guess I want to pose one of my questions while I'm waiting for folks to enter questions for you into the Q&A, which is, can you maybe speak to how you can conceptualize Indigenous food sovereignty in urban settings? And then maybe how that is different from kind of food security and how you see it. And then we do have some other questions from folks in the Q&A after you answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I also just want to preface that there's hundreds of urban Native communities across the United States alone. And I'm from Baltimore, or not from Baltimore. I'm from Detroit. I worked in Baltimore for a few years and have done some work with Minneapolis and hoping to move out there and do some work with them in my PhD. And I think it looks a little different for every community. A community like Detroit, where we had our own urban farm. We had an acre farm in Romanowski Park where we were able to grow out food. That was amazing. And it was really amazing to watch people interact with their traditional foods for the first time, or to learn to grow their own foods. But in a city like Baltimore, where the Native community, like our Urban Indian Health Program, rents an office that's one floor, we have no land. And it's hard to get land for us to grow out foods. So I think for us right now in Baltimore, I think the next step is just to get food. I think that's like the biggest thing, is to fix the food security problem and then work on some of these mental health relationships with food, of traditional foods, actually eating them when you have them instead of letting them sit on your shelf. And I know I do this. I'm guilty of when I get venison, it sits in my freezer for way too long because I'm scared to use it. So I think part of it is addressing holistic health, like the mental health relationships with food for some communities and just getting them access to food. But for communities like Detroit, where they're growing out foods, I think it's amazing to just get people involved and like actually in the field planting these foods and learning how these foods interact with the different moon cycles and the teachings around those foods. So I think it really depends on the community is my answer. And I think, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the kind of diversity of kind of urban settings and contexts. We do have some questions from our attendees. And given the time, I'm going to go ahead and ask the question first from Ashley Hickson. And they say, hello, Tara. As an African-American woman, I love your framing of cultural food insecurity. Do you know of any measurement tools that are available that can assess/evaluate that?
Yes. That's a great question. I think there is something, I don't want to say the person's name wrong. I believe someone in Canada has created a cultural food security measure, but I think like everything, the Canadian context, like the foods they eat are a little different than Piscataway and Susquehannock people that eat here in Maryland. So I think there are potentially examples out there, but I also think it's a huge field, like just measuring things that are important to community and rather than things that maybe aren't so important. So I think measuring cultural food security is a really important thing. And I would encourage you, I mean, one, you're welcome to just email me. I'd happy to talk more about this, but also just to work with the community and say what foods are important to you and then put them in a measure and work with somebody to make it work. I think that would be really cool to do that.
Great, thank you. And then we do have several other questions. I'm going to ask one more, just looking at the time. And I'm going to ask this one, which is from Teresa Davidson. And they ask, where can we access the report on the quantitative and qualitative findings you just discussed? Thank you, such important work.
Yeah, so I'm actually working with Cassandra. Cassandra knows. So I'm working on getting these results out, hopefully in the next few months. I do have a community report that my community partner has that has all of this stuff. They haven't published it yet or put it on their website, but it'll also be available in, the peer-reviewed journals. I'm also happy to just share with people, like if it's helpful, because I think the peer review process, they probably won't be published until minimum June would be my expectation. But yeah, I'm also happy to keep in contact. I'm on ResearchGate and stuff. So if people follow people on there, I don't know if people use it as social media. You can also keep up with me there.
Thank you. I just want to invite everybody to thank Tara once again for sharing your story and for sharing your kind of contact information. If you want to follow up, then she's made that available. So thank you. And I'd like to be able to transition to our next speaker. And speakers, I should say. So we have the fortune of having Dr. Melissa Lewis and Pam Iron join us today. And Melissa Lewis is an assistant professor of family and community medicine at the University of Missouri School of Medicine. She partners with Indigenous communities to revitalize traditional lifeways, to ameliorate the negative effects of colonization, thereby improving well-being. And then we also have Pam Iron with us today. And Pam Iron has 40 or 45 years of experience working with Indian country development programs and assisting communities in discovering their needs and facilitating problem solving and community planning. And so I want to give them as much time as possible to share with us today during their lightning talk. So please join me in welcoming them today for their lightning talk in the symposium.
Well, I guess I'll start off. I'm Pamela Iron, and I'm Cherokee in Laguna Pueblo. And it's a real pleasure to be here today to share with you our experiences that we are having working with food sovereignty and implementing this on our land that we have acquired.
Nagad, thank you so much for having us here. It's been amazing so far. My name is Melissa Lewis. I work at the University of Missouri in the School of Medicine, and I come to this project kind of started more in a role working with the American Indian Resource Center. I'll go ahead and just talk a little bit about the context of this project. So what a wonderful, symposium this has been so far. Really thinking about what Ade said, what Electa said, and even Tara, thinking about traditional food systems, thinking about food sovereignty as really holistic principles. I like that Electa echoed that message that if there is an issue in the indigenous food systems, there's an issue somewhere else in the community. And thinking in that context, our health is very much related to our culture, and the data supports this pretty strongly. in the health literature. So we know Indigenous people suffer from higher rates of mental and physical health disease, but the data is becoming more clear and echoing what Indigenous people know, that our cultural life ways, including plants and food systems, relate to improved physical and mental health in Indigenous communities. Not only that, traditional Indigenous diets, and in our context, traditional Cherokee diets are more micronutrient dense than the average American diet today. They reflect local and seasonal food systems, which are critical for the health of our environment, reducing environmental degradation, but also what happens in the seasons, such as the plants that arrive, are gifts to us, and they're micronutrient dense gifts, and they come right when we need them, right in the seasons that we need them. And not only that, traditional Cherokee diets engage families and communities. So traditional food systems are healthy in all of the domains that some of the speakers have already talked about, and even more. And I just have an image up here by, it was created by a group led by Arlo Starr, and it just reflects some critical components of Cherokee food systems. You'll see our traditional language, you'll see our seasons, our solstice, you see what traditional activities happen as individuals, what happens as groups. So I wanted to set the stage for our project. And so I'll hand it over to Pam.
Okay, what I'd like to share with you is a little bit about our Camp 7-Star. The American Indian Resource Center provides educational enhancement to rural schools in northeastern Oklahoma, a Cherokee reservation. And about 3 years ago, we were able to acquire this experiential outdoor learning center. And I've always had a passion and always felt that experiential learning is the key to all learning. And so with this opportunity, it really gave us a leg up in actually working with youth in the outdoors. And this camp is located south of Tahlequah on the banks of the 10-Killer Lake. And we have about 260 acres. And as you can kind of see the native tree, we have native plants, beautiful foliage, and of course, sparkling water, and a bunch of wildlife there. We have, this camp was abandoned, and we've been able in the last 3 years, just because of the commitment that our board and our staff and the community's made, we have really brought this camp into a place that is able to do a lot of different things with our schools. We have about 40 different schools that we work with. You want to change the slide? And this slide just shows the timeline. We started in April of 2018, and we have a 25-year lease on its core land, and it is up in 2043. But we feel like that this camp will go on in time immemorial. These are the highlights of what we have done with this camp. And we've done quite a bit of renovation. We've volunteers. We hold cultural camps. And we've even introduced a spatial media lab where we have virtual reality, and we're able to connect with 10 different schools in this regard. We've restored gardens, and we have a small greenhouse. And we've maintained our ropes courses, and we just continue to improve the grounds because we want to be able to provide an opportunity for our students to be able to enjoy the plants, learn about medicine plants. And we're really glad we were able to establish a partnership with the Tribal Alliance of Pollinators. This has been very important. This last year, we were able to plant milkweed and have our students be very involved in this. This shows you some of the opportunities that we provide for our students that come out. They learn all about the traditional games, and we also have traditional activities. And this is important because most of these children, this is the first time that they've actually been able to engage in a lot of activities in the outdoors and also their cultural games. And this is, of course, the high ropes and the low ropes that we have. And this is really a skill building and trust building, team building, which is very important in the life of children. And this last slide of our activities shows some of our camp activities that we do in the realm of STEAM. And then on the right side shows our spatial lab and the learning that goes on there using virtual reality. And then the next, you can see our garden. We have a garden project, and we're showing some of the ladies around from OSU in regard to, this was a garden that had been abandoned, and so we were trying to bring it back to life.
So when American Indian Resource Center acquired this land, we also decided to start a land and ecology subcommittee to really think about how to be in good relation with these 260 acres of land, animals, plants, the air, the water that surrounds it. So we are in the process of looking at that. And first we have to look at our history, the history of who had this land. And the Army Corps of Engineers does own the land, which means that there were people that were caretakers for this land before. And so learning how to respect the people in these places has been important. And the bottom left corner, there's a picture. We do believe that this probably also was a loblolly logging area. So there are some plants that are there that shouldn't be. We have quite a few invasive plants as well. But really taking the time to walk the land, spend time there, let us learn that we want to focus on increasing pollinators, so increasing native plants. So we have Brandon Gibson from Tribal Alliance for Pollinators working with some of the students, some of the campers down there. We are working to have particular areas within Camp 7 Star that are designated around traditional Cherokee plants, and there's a bloodroot in the middle where we might be transplanting or making sure to protect them. So bringing traditional plants back to this area that might have gone away given the ecosystem has changed historically. And then we also do some foraging. So it is Sagi Anage Ehi Ale Jueji season. So it is green onion and egg season coming up right now. And so we try to also work to forage some of our own foods and teach the children how to do that as well. Here's one of our gatherings where we actually didn't make this particular food, but we work to collaborate with local Indigenous and Cherokee food vendors. And maybe Pam, you can talk about the kitchen and other food related resources.
Well, and we do have a commercial kitchen that we work diligently to get certified. And this is really important to our food programs, because we are teaching the drying and also canning from our garden. The vision and future plans include serve youth and their families. And what we're looking at even this summer is to have family camps that build around not only our cultural skill building games, but also for us to really start talking about the native and medicine plants, and to start building the practice of individuals learning to be keepers of the land. And this is really important to recognize this, because the children really enjoy the land. I mean, sometimes it's the first time that they really had an opportunity to just be free and enjoy nature. Our plans are to also expand STEM and STEAM programs, and also look at expanding our after-school programs.
So one particular program that we have been so grateful to partner with OSU Center for Indigenous Health Research and Policy is around an Indigenous plant and ecology curriculum. We plan to create trainings for students. And let me back up a little bit. I am just so grateful for American Indian Resource Center, and I believe this is true. They service 10,000 Indigenous youth in our region, providing culturally specific programming. And so to be a part of that and the lives of these young people is amazing. And then to add Camp 7 Star, this place for them to go and reconnect with their tribal community and with the land, has been so exciting. So we're going to continue to do some of that land assessment to make sure we're good relatives and relations with all living things at Camp 7 Star. We're working to add garden and structural additions, really neat things, like we're kind of planning our dream gardens, our outdoor gathering centers, thinking about traditional Cherokee summer homes, traditional Indigenous structures. But we have just initiated a community planning committee to help guide all of these goals through these programs. And that has been so exciting. We have water protectors. We have fluent Cherokee speakers and elders. We have people experts in native Indigenous plants and pollinators, and native youth curriculum experts, along with a variety of people. And so this was just a glimpse into a program that we're starting, and so you can see where we're at, but we're kind of newbies and beginners at this, I think, Pam. So we certainly welcome any advice or input. And again, just thank you Valarie and your team for having us.
Thank you, Dr. Melissa Lewis and Pam Iron. It was so great to see so many photos of just young people out in nature, as well as just the smiles of foraging green onion, right? Like, it's so so I want to encourage folks to send their thank you and their gratitude in the chat for your presentation, as well as encourage everyone who may have a question to enter that into the Q&A feature, and also use that upvote feature to vote for questions that you'd like to see answered. We do have one already submitted by an anonymous attendee that I'm going to go ahead and read now. With this not being land originally for the Cherokee Nation prior to removal, will there also be any traditional plants brought from the East in partnership with EBC will there be focus on traditional healing medicines as well? So,
And just on cue, I see the amazing Missy Mary Crow from Eastern Band. I forgot to mention within our community planning group, we do have a wonderful group. They call themselves Wapskineh, the Big Witch Community Initiative. And so we have 4 people from Eastern Band that we partner with. There's a lot of overlap. I guess let me back up. We probably will not be bringing plants that are from the Smoky Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, to where we're at in Oklahoma, because they don't belong there. But we have a lot of shared knowledge. And while they have things like ramps, washti, we have green onions, sagi, anige, ehi. So we're going to work together because we are still connected as a tribe. Many of our foodways, we rely on each other because when tribes are disconnected, some members of the family have some knowledge and some have others. We don't have the land anymore. But from stories I've heard from elders, when Cherokees were removed to Oklahoma, because of our and ever, all Indigenous people's deep understanding of plants. And from what I understand, Cherokees use root systems to classify plants. We were able to use that knowledge and use similar or equivalent plants here in Oklahoma. So there's a lot of amazing collaboration that can happen and that has already happened. And thank you to Missy Crow for being on the call, Tyson Sampson, Charles Taylor, and to the wonderful Aunt Amy for holding that knowledge and sharing it with us.
thank you. We do have 2 other questions that have been submitted. The first one is a question from Amanda Funk, and they ask, can you share the Indigenous Youth Plant and Ecology curriculum that you mentioned?
Well, we are very, very inspired by the amazing folks at Grub, and they represent folks up in the Coast Salish region. I could probably put it into the chat in a moment. We just started this project, so we're not quite sure what our curriculum will look like. But like I said, their curriculum, I'm trying to think of the actual name of their curriculum right now. Thank you, Cassandra, for putting that in. The Tend, Gather, Grow is one amazing curriculum. Another one is social and emotional learning from plants. That one is very fantastic. Elise Crone, Mariana Harvey, Brett Ramey, that crew. They put some of these programs together. And from what I understand, I hope they're okay with us sharing, shouting out to them. They've been able to tailor that from Coast Salish communities to other Indigenous communities. The social emotional learning from plants, that to me is very exciting. They've partnered with the Northwest Indian Treatment Center. So they looked at the behavioral health components of learning from plants. So components like mindfulness, awareness from nettles, for example. So they're fantastic. So glad to know them and so glad for the work that they've done.
Great, thank you. So I think to keep us on time, I won't be able to ask the other questions that are currently in the Q&A, but if you would like to consider those, they will be available to the panelists to view now, and then we can also facilitate that they be shared after today's symposium. So again, I want to give a big thank you to Dr. Melissa Lewis and Pam Iron for being here with us today and sharing some of your work.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So we are now going to transition to our final lightning talk speaker, Dr. Austin Henderson. Austin received his PhD from University of California, San Diego, and currently he's here with me in Seattle at the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health, also known as iReach at Washington State University. So I want to give him a warm welcome for his lightning talk, which will talk about the kind of economic perspective of food sovereignty. Welcome, Austin.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here today and talk to all of you. I'm here to talk or give a brief introduction to economics and how economics research and analysis can support food sovereignty programs and initiatives. My hope also is that it is economics. It is a little dry and less interesting than other talks, so I hope I don't put everyone to sleep this early in the day. I think I need the permission to do next slide.
Austin, go ahead and click it again.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. All right, so quick outline for this lightning talk. First, I'm going to give a definition explaining what I mean by the economics of food sovereignty. So economics can be a lot of things. I want to mostly talk about how it can be practically useful in food sovereignty research and initiatives. Second, I'm going to talk about why you should want to incorporate economics research and analysis, and hopefully convince you that it's something worth bringing to your programs. Third, I'm going to briefly talk about how to incorporate economics. Not really getting too much into the nitty-gritty of it, but speaking into how it can be incorporated either into projects that are already up and running, or how it can be more deeply integrated in projects that are still in the design phase. Last, I'm going to try and bring everything together with an illustrative example of how health economics works really well with food sovereignty programs. So first, economics of food sovereignty. As I said, economics can be a lot of different things, but I want to mostly leave everyone here today with a sense of how it can be really useful and, directly related to some of the pressing concerns that people have in getting food sovereignty programs up and running. So the three primary concepts that I think are most useful are cost feasibility, cost benefit, and cost efficacy analyses. Cost feasibility is sort of the base of everything, and it's a really straightforward idea, which is just if we know the costs that go into starting one of these or running a food sovereignty program, it allows us to answer really fundamental questions like, is it feasible to create a working community garden with a $50,000 seed grant? That's something that I think is useful and interesting for lots of people to know, and it requires sharing of information for that to get out there. Building on cost data, we can talk about the benefits that are measurable from food sovereignty programs, and that really expands the scope of what we're able to say about what food sovereignty can actually accomplish. So if we identify benefits of food sovereignty and combine those estimated benefits with economic estimates, we can answer much more complex questions like, if we spend $100,000 on this program to support Native farmers, how does this change food quality in the community? And putting things into this final idea of cost benefit analyses, how much future healthcare spending is diverted? And I'll be coming back to that example as we go through the talk. So why incorporate economics? So I think everyone here would agree that there are a ton of completely sufficient reasons to support food sovereignty programs that don't rely upon economics at all. So I think economics, my arguments for including economics are based on supporting those reasons and not displacing them at all. A lot of that has to do with budgeting processes. So food sovereignty programs are often not cheap, and they're competing for funding and resources in really constrained budgets. Where economic analysis can be helpful is it can show that, for one, if we're thinking cost feasibility, that it's just possible to achieve a meaningful food sovereignty program within a given budget. Second, it can help demonstrate the value of food sovereignty programs in terms that are clearly important for budgeters. I think it's often the case that budgeters are really interested in having things put into dollar terms, and economics can help accomplish that. Third, I think economics research can be really useful in improving the implementation of all sorts of programs because you can identify aspects or features of programs that are getting you really valuable returns. So that is to say, if you incorporate economics research, you're not just all appealing to budgeting, you can actually sometimes find useful insights into what's working and what's not in food sovereignty programs. Last, here's an idea I really want to impress upon everyone, which is this idea of meta budgeting. Economics can help demonstrate that food sovereignty programs belong in the budgets of non-traditional sources. Some potential funding sources, some very well-funded like healthcare systems, may indeed already be stakeholders in developing food sovereignty, but they don't know it yet. So if you can, show that your program actually is just implied in the budget of other, funding sources like health systems, that's great, and that can open up a lot of new doors. So how to incorporate economics? So first I want to talk about if you've already got a project up and running. I would just like to say it's not too late to incorporate meaningful economic analyses into your work, and especially to share important economic data that will be really useful for building this community of food sovereignty research. So that is to say, with just collecting data on the costs of implementation, like the costs of everything that's going into your program, you can do cost feasibility analysis. This is probably not unattainable so long as you've been holding on to receipts and such. Second, there's probably some outcomes that you can realistically measure, even if your program is already up and running. For instance, things like farm outputs or sales, and you can do cost benefit or cost efficacy analyses based on these. Even if it's a fairly a simple outcome measure, that's still really important to know. And definitely share everything you learn. So it's always the case that in performing economics research that we like to know how programs, what can we learn from juxtaposing various different initiatives to each other? That's how we engage in this process of learning which aspects of programs are most cost efficacious or provide the largest cost benefit. If we're thinking about how to incorporate economics in the design phase, we can get a lot more integrated into every aspect of the program. And that's, I think, the most exciting to me. So that is to say, if you think about the different potential funding sources that you might be interested in, for instance, healthcare systems, you can take that goal of trying to get money out of the healthcare system and use that to design and change features of your program from the ground up. So the example I like to use here is healthcare systems. So if you think that your food sovereignty program might potentially have an impact on people's health, which I think is probably a fairly reasonable assumption, you should design your program from the ground up to measure changes in that health. That's going to tie in later to securing future funding. 3 more points, just sort of, again, very high level thinking about practical points for incorporating health economics research. First is figure out how you're going to collect data ahead of time, whether you're going to have central reporting and collection of costs or which surveys you want to distribute. Making these decisions about data collection will often change about how you think about your project and can help you make changes that make the effects more measurable. Second, consider making your project an experiment. Having a control group can help make your results much more convincing and might not always prohibitively increase costs. This is especially the case as scale increases. So if you're considering a fairly large program, I think experiments can be, or incorporating some element of an experimental design can be a really good idea. There's often a lot of technical expertise that goes into designing a randomized controlled trial, which can be pretty daunting and overwhelming. It's often the case, I think, that universities, especially local ones, can be interested in partnering with you to provide this design and analysis expertise. So bringing it all to this example of food sovereignty and health. So the target here is looking at healthcare costs. So as we all know, healthcare costs are gigantic, and they're still gigantic in comparison with the cost of implementing food sovereignty programs. Just two statistics that I've picked out to emphasize this are the costs associated with diabetes treatment and heart attack treatment. So a single person having a single year of diabetes is associated with an average medical cost of about $10,000. And the typical costs of a 3-day hospital stay from a heart attack are around $25,000. So if you can demonstrate that a program, a food sovereignty program, can likely divert even some of this spending, you could potentially demonstrate that the project provides net cost savings to healthcare systems. So how might food sovereignty impact things like heart attacks and diabetes? There's a lot of different pathways, and not all of them require you to wait, the 10 or 15 years to actually observe health outcomes. For instance, you can observe changes in diet quality and reduce food insecurity and make inferences about future changes in these healthcare spending. So for example, if you're thinking about how to design a farm subsidy program to take advantage of or to try and leverage potentially useful health economics findings, you can expand the farm subsidy program to add elements like grocery delivery or subsidized food vouchers to community members to directly address these things like diet quality and food insecurity. If you measure diet quality and the prevalence of food insecurity before the project to get your baseline and then measure changes associated with the program, you can then generate pretty compelling economic estimates of future cost savings associated with these programs. I think this is going to be useful for expanding and acquiring more funding for successful food sovereignty research. So I pushed through that pretty quickly. Looks like I successfully convinced myself to not go way over time, as I typically do. And I'm happy to answer questions now.
Thank you, Austin. We really appreciate you providing this perspective, and we've had some really interesting chat going on as people are digesting kind of the ideas that you're bringing up. We do have 2 questions that have already been posed specifically to you in the Q&A, though I encourage folks to look at the existing questions, upvote those that you'd like to see answered, and then contribute additional questions that you think might be relevant as we start in the last couple minutes of the session. So there's this question that was posed by an anonymous attendee, and they asked, are capitalism and Indigenous food sovereignty compatible?
So that's a big question. I guess my personal belief would be that they are not super compatible, given that, well, that's hard to say. I guess it depends on what someone's definition of capitalism is. I tend to personally be in favor of community ownership of things like food production systems, which sort of sets me as, it's not a typical view among economists, to put it lightly, but I am more personally in favor of developing food sovereignty programs than I am in the preservation of existing economic systems. So I hope that's a useful answer.
Yeah, I really appreciate you grappling with that question. And Valarie, Dr. Valarie Jernigan in the chat is saying thank you for handling the hardest question of the symposium. I think that the next one, though, might be a contender for another difficult question and to grapple with. And this is a question from Timothy Thomas, and they ask, can you put a dollar value on spiritual and mental well-being that is associated with eating traditional food?
I don't think you could put, at least it doesn't seem obvious to me how you could put a dollar valuation on spiritual well-being. And I think that's a really important shortcoming in economics research, and why I really want to emphasize that economics research should be supplementary to some of the more heartfelt reasons for supporting food sovereignty. So I don't think it is definitely a thing within economics to try and put a dollar valuation on as many things as you can. I don't think that it's necessarily useful in cases like talking about spiritual well-being. In the case of mental well-being, outside of the spiritual well, I think probably a similar answer, except if you're getting into clearly defined cases where you're talking about, you know, how much money is being spent on psychiatric care, for instance. I think when we're talking about like actual costs going into healthcare spending associated with mental well-being, that maybe is where economics should stand to play a valuable role, but probably not in terms of trying to estimate people's spiritual health.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, thank you for giving us all this kind of topics to consider in addition to everything else that's been discussed in the symposium. You've generated a lot of conversation in the chat, as I mentioned, and we have several more questions that unfortunately I don't think we're going to be able to address live. However, I'd encourage Austin, if he has time, to consider those in the Zoom platform. And then I'll also, if that's not possible, I'll be able to facilitate getting you those questions asynchronously for your consideration. So thank you again, Austin, and thank you all of our attendees for their engagement during this session. Yeah, so helpful to be here.
Cassandra, thank you so much. I appreciate you navigating and holding some amazing speakers. Austin, beautiful. Thank you. Tara, thank you. Pam, thank you. Melissa, thank you. Tonya, thank you. You all did a wonderful job. People are just eating up what you had to share. So let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back exactly in 10 minutes. So once the music goes down, come back, stand up. Be sure to stand up, drink some water if you can, go out and get some fresh air. But we'll see you in 10 minutes. All right.
The rain, don't go out into the night. It happens every day. They just vanish from sight. Don't go walking alone. Speak to who you don't know. They've been finding your sisters in the Red River, in the Red River, in the red, in the red, in the Don't go out without your brother. They've been calling your name. See that truck at the corner. See that look on his face. We've got so much to fear. Down on the highway of tears. They've been finding your sisters in the Red River, in the Red River, in the red, in the red, in the red, in the red.
Who will search for the missing, tell the stories untold. Don't forget the light of those we lost in the night, 'cause they've been finding your sisters in the Red River, in the Red River.
We were told long ago that we would see America come and go. I often wondered what generation that would be. What would be the signs that we would see America in its failing times? And I think we're in that. And I think that this kind of exploitation is more recognizable and identifiable. Cultures are getting stronger and beginning to realize it's about your own survival and not about America so much. But the more pollution there is, the more cancer there is. So you begin to see a nation dying from within.
So what you know about the life of a native? Growing up, the generations most hated. Every day my people get discriminated based on the stereotypes you done created. Nowadays you have the audacity to pass us off as a lower class. Nowadays you laugh at us, but now is a day where we finally had enough of this day. Now all the days we're standing up. Too many years you oppressed us, suppressed us, infect us with your disease and left us. Millions of my people dead, now you expect us to forgive and forget like it don't affect us. You could try to change history and hide that it wasn't genocide, but read between the lines and you will find more crimes, masterminded. Now you wonder why people turn to suicide and have a hard time searching and finding who they really are, cause they're constantly reminded of the time when you came uninvited, entered our homes and took your young kids crying away from their families, the tragedies left scars so deep, no apologies will ever cover up the pain that you caused us. Now is the day where you see my people stand up. So what you know about the life of a native? Growing up, the generations most hated. Every day my people get discriminated based on the stereotypes you done created. Nowadays you have the audacity to pass us off as a lower class. Nowadays you laugh at us, but now is the day where we finally had enough of this day. Now all the days we're standing up. Now all the days you'll commend and respect us. Gone all the days you apprehend and offend us. Pretend to us you're a friend, but forget. Trust, we all know the scheme that you're hiding your agendas. We all see through the deceit and the lies. A smile in the skies, but your eyes can't hide it. But now is the time we'll speak and we'll rise. All you want is other minds, but we can't stay silent. Through our chiefs and the elders we have guided. Divided we fall, but together stand united. For our earth and the water we will fight it. Our mother earth is crying, now you can't deny it. We are not the enemy that we're set to be. We're thinking of the generation that's ahead of me. So we'll continue to take the earth back for all of us. White, black, or brown, well together we should stand up. So what you know about the life of a native? Growing up, the generations most hated. Every day my people get discriminated based on the stereotypes you done created. Nowadays you have the audacity to pass us off as a lower class. Nowadays you laugh at us, but now is the day where we finally had enough of this day. Now all the days we're standing up. So what you know about the life of a native? Growing up, the generations most hated. Every day my people get discriminated based on the stereotypes you done created. Nowadays you have the audacity to pass us off as a lower class. Nowadays you laugh at us, but now is the day where we finally had enough of this day. Now all the days we're standing it up.
And in a world where we need to build on mutual respect, it's moving slowly across this country and educating people. So I think there's a time when all racism will be abolished.
All righty, welcome back, everyone. I hope the music got you up and moving your body. You should all stand up and stretch. Rotate your shoulders. Okay, let's continue. That was really great. I wish that we had more time to just really unpack the lightning talks. Beautiful. I am hoping you all were able to harvest some things, and we'll, at the end, we'll definitely spend some time seeing what really spoke to you and what kind of bubbled up during those talks. So we are going to the next part of our time together, and I want to welcome back and introduce Dr. Valarie Blue Bird Jernigan. Just in case some of you who weren't here yesterday, she did our official welcome and talked a little bit about the purpose and the overview, and we wanted to bring her back and have her talk a little bit about the Center for Indigenous Health Research and Policy. Those of you who have not really read her bio, don't know much about her, amazing, passionate woman. I've heard her name being lifted for the past day and a half, yesterday and today. And, you know, her real focus, like what is leading and pulling her heart, is really looking at relationship building. And as you can tell from the different panelists yesterday and today, that is essential, is the relationship building. And so she wants to continue to foster those relationships in our Indigenous communities to really promote tribal sovereignty and to build Native communities' capacity to improve health. I found it interesting that she has a degree in documentary filmmaking, which makes a lot of sense in our communities, because the storytelling, right? To tell the story, and we're very visual people. So she has that degree in that area and has just done tons of research. So to spend some time looking at her bio, but you'll get to hear a little bit more from her. She started and established in 2019 the Center for Indigenous Health Research and Policy, and now directs this organization. So she's going to give us an overview, and we're going to have a little bit of time, about 5 minutes after she gives an overview, for you to provide or ask questions, and she'll provide some responses and answers to the questions that you have. Thank you again so much for being here fully. Valarie, you're up. I think you're on mute, Valarie.
Okay, sorry about that. I think everybody can hear me now and see me.
Yes.
So I'm timing myself because I've actually never given this presentation before. So you're going to be the first ones to see this. And I'm going to tell you about the Center for Indigenous Innovation and Health Equity, which really, I don't know what to call this. It's a center, but I think it's more of a process or an experiment or an idea, because it's a journey, and I'll kind of share with you how it started. I'll start with the genealogy of it, and then the partners that we have and the purpose of the center. And then I'll move to how we're structured and the activities that we're engaging in. And then opportunity for folks in, you know, in this symposium to potentially get involved. So this is a picture of a group of us from Osage Nation and Hawaii and New Zealand. The CIHI, Center for Indigenous Innovation and Health Equity is what it's called, CIHI for short, began as a partnership between me and Kukui Mauna Kea and Kamwelo Enos. And if you're from Hawaii, you've probably heard of these folks. I was interested in their activism around land and youth, and specifically how their farm, Ma'o, yes, I'm seeing some stuff in the chat, had inadvertently created all these positive health impacts on Native Hawaiian youth. And not just the youth that worked at the farm, but actually their families. And then they did this larger social network analysis that really showed that this farm and the program of getting youth working on this farm in exchange for paying their tuition to go to college was lowering A1C levels, was reducing risk of diabetes, was promoting mental health, was just having these beautiful impacts on health. And it wasn't even a health intervention. It was reconnection with the land. So as a health researcher, I was very interested in this. And I was also, you know, looking for mentors, and Kukui and Kamwelo, Kamu, they were becoming my mentors. And so I wanted to bring Osage folks that I was working with at the time. You know, we've had this long partnership with Osage Nation to engage with Native Hawaiians, to go to this farm to see what they were doing and to engage in some sort of cross-cultural learning exchange. I didn't really know what we would do, but I thought we could co-develop it because they were very interested in doing this at Ma'o. And they even have some partners from New Zealand that they were wanting to bring over. And so we decided we would co-develop this process where we got together for, they called it a NOHO, which in their language is a period of deep reflection and analysis and co-learning. And so we spent a week together, and this is a picture of our group, where we focused on restoring what had been broken, the ways in which we had been disconnected from the land. And I would say, you know, most importantly, how we could do something together, something that would be restoring health in our respective communities. And through that process, we became very close. And we said at that time, our heart maps overlaid their heart maps. And so when our NOHO ended, we went back to our communities and we were going to do something to continue this work, but we needed to find some funding. And so we couldn't find anything that really fit what we thought would be what we wanted to do. So we ended up actually going to Congress and petitioning to create, in their words, my partners in Hawaii, a new wellspring. We basically went to Congress and we were like, we need to create a Center for Indigenous Innovation. And we added health equity because we were like, and it's related to health. Indigenous innovation, we called it because that is what we've always done as Native people. Our whole entire history is based on systemic resilience and innovating. And we innovate in times of change, in times of need. And I think that that's been a theme that you've seen across this entire, symposium. When things change, we shift and we know how to respond. And so we were able to actually get Congress to allocate funds, and it was approved by the Senate And they issued it, and there was a notice of award or notice of funding opportunity that went out, and we all applied for it, and we were able to receive the funding. But contrary to what we had originally planned, which was to work together, Congress split the opportunity into two sections: Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, and Native American Indians and Alaska Natives. And so we ended up having two separate centers. So that is when we expanded our circle, which was originally Osage Nation, to include Choctaw Nation and to include our partners in Alaska. And I will go to the next slide to show you. These are our partners. These are this is Osage Nation, and this is Choctaw, my tribal nation. And then we have partners in Fairbanks, and they're partnering with Denokanaga, which is an elders nonprofit organization. And we have partners in South Central, Anchorage, Alaska. And so our partners got together, our circle expanded, and we wrote and developed this CIHI, this Center for Indigenous Innovation and Health Equity. Our goal was simple. It was basically to uplift and spotlight the food sovereignty initiatives going on in these communities, not the big health initiatives that get funded and that, they have all of the, advertisement for, but actually grassroots local initiatives on food sovereignty. The types of programs that might tend to be marginalized, maybe not have a lot of funding, but are truly grassroots. And our purpose was simple: identify them and support them, and trust that these communities have the solutions and that we can provide support, but really get out of their way. Now, we did have to identify and support community prioritized initiatives, as I said, that restore traditional food systems and practice to promote health and wellness. And so we, as you know, any of you who do community-based participatory research, we had to write enough detail within the grant to be able to get funded and supported. So we had three main components: education and training. And by this, we meant bi-directional education and training. So what do the communities need? What do we as academics need to support them? Research and evaluation. This isn't funded by the NIH or something like that. It's funded by Office of Minority Health. So it's not research per se, but it is initiatives that are evaluated by the community's own definitions of what is success and what is, how do they want to measure the usefulness of this, the efficacy of this. And then dissemination, sharing with everyone what we are doing so that other communities can potentially partner and learn from this. And so these are the partners, and this is who is involved, and the different sort of, pillars of what we're aiming to do with this. One of the models that we like in terms of our education and training component is the Aboriginal food security model that comes out of Northern Canada. And it conceptualizes food security and its relationship with food sovereignty as being influenced by so many factors, including place and environmental change and intergenerational well-being, economies, as Austin just talked about, rights, health, culture, and resources. So those are things that we're considering in our work together. We are aiming to engage in a very Indigenous and decolonizing process. And those of you who know, maybe you've done community-based participatory research, that takes research to a level where it is completely driven by the community. But I would say that Indigenous and decolonizing methodologies are the next level of that. And so this is an experience for us. We are engaging actively in this process in a very colonized space of academia, of federal funding, and we were exploring how to do this. And that's the journey that we are going on together. And so it means adapting and shifting and changing based on what the community preferences are and what is needed to support this work. Our focus is on systemic resilience, Indigenous methods of evaluation. Potentially, we may develop food sovereignty curricula, but they have to be place-based. They have to be land-based. And we have to consider all 4 of these initiatives as really 4 distinct and separate initiatives. Though they may be under the umbrella of food sovereignty, those things look very different in the 4 separate places. And we want to not fit those initiatives into a prescribed set of activities dictated by an external grant, but we want to actually celebrate how this grant is being used in the different places to support this work in its distinction. Research and evaluation is a tool to be used for this initiative, but it will be determined by the respective communities. Some of the things that we might measure, depending on how important and relevant they are, could be things like the reduction of chronic disease risk. And how do you develop community prioritized interventions and measures for that? Those are all some of the factors that we'll be looking at. And one of the things I would say that's really exciting about this is it's all Indigenous led. So everybody, all of the principal investigators at all 4 of the sites are Native. They're actually Native PhDs. All of the evaluators are Native. The dissemination partners in CAI are Native. So that was one of the big things when we came together. We all kind of looked at each other and we were like, how did we manage to assemble this entirely Native run multi-site center? And so it's been a real shift, and it's an opportunity for us to do something in this space that is not often done. Dissemination, we're partnering with NCAI to share the stories. We hope to create stories at all 4 sites about how they are doing this experience and journey. And I put this last slide in because I think it's really important to recognize power differentials and the history of academic community partnerships. Yes, community-based participatory research acknowledges the power differences, but we wanted to create a culturally safe environment where research is one part of this program evaluation, but it is not, it is not the be-all end-all to measure the success. We have to be socially, spiritually, and emotionally safe, and we have to be engaging constantly in our own learning processes. And so that is what we are engaging in now. And we've just started. We're in year 1. We're about 6 months into year 1. We have probably a few folks on the call who are from that. Our hope is to continue to get CHE funded through this allocation process and to expand it so that it grows to support other grassroots initiatives in other communities. and trusting those communities that they know how to do this work and that they need to be supported and celebrated for the work that they're doing. So that is the end of my presentation, and I would love to take any questions you have. And thank you for, sorry, it's a little bit not very formal because I haven't given it yet. This is the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Valarie. Let's see what we have in the Q&A. So Cynthia West had said, wondering if anyone has attempted an ROI for Indigenous commensary type market.
I don't even know, what is that? I would need to learn more about that.
So I think it's a form of investment.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see what I'm just looking in the chat because sometimes people have put things in the chat. Everyone's saying thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm curious, Valarie, first of all, amazing. I love that when people are visionaries and when vision come to place, particularly when some of the other organizations are putting the programs together and you're still in the year of learning, right? A year and 6 months.
Yeah.
And so what has been the greatest learning for you in this journey with your co-conspirators?
I think the biggest component of learning is how to have relational culture in an academic environment rather than in an environment that's so transactional. And engaging, we engage in co-learning, we engage in these processes where we really are partners. But I think that we rarely get the opportunity to do work that is healing and goes deeper within this environment. We do in community environments, but we don't get that opportunity to do that in academic environments. And I think that that's the chance that we have with this because we created the funding source. And this is, I said this once to one of my friends, academia is a oppressive environment, and it is a very racist environment. That's not news to anyone. And part of the reason that I've been successful in academia is that I have generated funding. And in some ways I liken it to, in Oklahoma, we sovereign tribes, many of us, we don't, we buy our land back. People are not giving us our land back. We're buying it back, we're taking it back. And so it's the same in academia. I feel like the funding that I've generated has sort of bought me this place where I now have the opportunity to, do something with that. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm really trying with my partners, my community partners and my mentors, to get this space back and to make it into something different and better than it has been. So we'll see how it goes. I don't really know. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but yeah, I have faith.
Thank you. So there is a question, and there's a couple people who gave it a thumbs up. And the question is, where can we find information about the health outcomes and connections to land stewardship?
Ooh, that is such a good question. So yeah, where can you find connections about? So there is a small body of publications around reconnecting with land and its health impacts and benefits on Native communities. And though that has been so marginalized from models of, Western medicine and public health, connection to the land has not been a social determinant of health that has been considered valuable. Indigenous scholars are publishing on that, and they are writing about that, and you can find some of that work. Melissa Lewis, who's on our panel, has published some work around that. Charlotte Cote has published some work around that. You know, there's some new coming out, but it hasn't been, it's definitely not been centered in the literature. We have so few Indigenous models of health that is one area where we need more.
Thank you. So we have one more here. Thank you so much for this presentation, Valarie. This is from Phoebe Young. I was wondering if you might be able to speak a little bit more to how you are, as a researcher, prioritizing a relational culture in your everyday work with your community, while also navigating the colonial demands of academia.
I think it's really important to be honest about your ability to do this at the various stages in your career. I'm able to do this because I fought and clawed my way to professor level, tenured. I think that when you're an assistant professor, it's more difficult to do this because you're, you know, you're going through the ranks and you're obliged to publish. And I think that things are changing a little bit, but, you know, I think in the ways that I've done it throughout my career, it's easier to do it now, but throughout my career, in the ways that I've done it is I've been very, very clear with community partners that research should never be done to serve knowledge production for the sake of knowledge. Research has to be done only for the purposes of supporting the community in its goals to create positive change. It has to be accountable to community members. So the outcomes, measures of success that we use are, they are determined, we're accountable to community partners. And if that is our measure of success, then the work that we do will be aligned with the community values in ways that we might forget if we only focus on the outcomes that the university dictates as successful publications and grants. So I center community priorities in that work. That created a relational, you know, more of a relationality to it. And I was willing to walk away from funding. And I made that very clear from every partnership that I did. If the funding was not in line with our work, I dumped it because I would rather, I'm beholden to a set of values that are higher than, you know, they relate to my own ancestry and my obligations, a mandate on my heart to do this work. So yeah, I think keeping that in mind, I think if you're a Native person, you know how to do that. It's a matter of putting it in place in those really constrained places, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Valarie. I appreciate you just really also lifting, like, in all the work that folks are doing, how important values are as foundational and really sort of like an internal compass, right? In the decisions that we make and how to, sometimes we don't know what to do, but if we listen, we're able to make the right choice and feel good about it, even if that means walking away from, you know, something in terms of like resources that may be beneficial. And that's hard. So thank you for that.
Sure.
I don't see other questions, but I'll have one more and then we can transition out. And it's more of sort of pulling it all together. And I know you had mentioned it earlier in the presentation, sort of call to action for folks, even to like individuals like myself, right? A community member, to folks who are students, tribal leaders, researchers, people on the ground doing the work. So if you want to just sort of ask and share with folks what we all can do.
Oh, in your communities around food sovereignty work?
And to learn more about your what you're doing with the organization, how they can get involved, if there's anything there, or even back at home in the community, whatever is wherever you're feeling to respond to the most.
I think that the people in this symposium, I'm so grateful for everybody coming together like this. And we didn't think we would get much of a turnout. So this has been really exciting for us to have this experience. I think that the main thing that I would say to community partners, and probably a lot of people know this, 20 years ago they didn't, Native communities didn't realize that their voices were center and most important in any kind of research partnership. And I think that, I think that that is changing. And I think that, Native communities know that research has to be done with sort of like Ade said yesterday, who's blessing this data. If the projects don't serve the goals of the community, they are not useful projects. And I think that short of that, there's really not much more to think about on that issue. Native communities have to be at the center in all of research and practice efforts. And I think I'd give a shout out to, there are people in our communities who are keeping language alive. There are people who are keeping stories and traditions alive, and they teach all of us, and their generosity in teaching us is humbling every day. And so if anything, I would say, I want to tell my elders how grateful I am that I get to be taught by them and by all my community partners. I get more and more challenged to public speak as I do this longer. It was weird when I was younger, I was super confident and I could speak all the time and I wasn't scared. I think as I get older, I get more anxious to do this work because I realize how little I actually know. And so I think it's just humbling that you look back and you think, wow, they were really gracious with me. And that's my main point, is just deep gratitude for this opportunity to do this work with my elders and my community partners.
Nirjana, beautiful, Valarie. Such wisdom there that you offered from your own internal reflections about where you've been and where you're at. A lot of love in the chat, so just letting you know. So thank you so much. We appreciate you giving us an overview, sharing your wisdom and your thoughts and sort of where you're at right now. All right, thanks. Okay, so we're in our last part of our day together. We have one more speaker. Before we do that, we're going to release a poll. Please do the poll for us. It's really helpful. We're going to put it in the chat box, so click on that and go ahead and take a second or so to just click that. And then as you are doing that, I am actually going to tee up our next speaker. And so if we can move the slide, that would be beautiful for me. I greatly appreciate it. And folks are filling that in, and I'm going to go ahead and tee up our next speaker. I actually feel like I need a deep breath. So let's take another deep breath together. Here we go. All right. Thank you. Okay. So our final speaker for this afternoon is Dr. Gary Ferguson. And Dr. Gary Ferguson is originally from the Chemehuevi Islands community of Sandpoint, Alaska. And he has a passion for healthy communities and population health approach. He was formerly trained as a naturopathic physician, and he actually is a co-producer of The Store Outside Your Door, which is an Alaska Native cultural food transition, around how to hunt, fish, gather, and grow, which I think is pretty cool. So he's in different positions before. He's provided clinical services. He's been a senior director of a community health service and also a CEO at Rural Cat. And so currently, Dr. Ferguson serves as a faculty and director of outreach and engagement at Washington State University's Institute. So without further ado, Dr. Gary Ferguson, please join us.
Kagasa Cook, Vicky, and Kilamakamna, good morning. Kamagalekamna, good afternoon. For those of you that it's afternoon, I know we have folks all over the nation. I'm so honored to be here today and share some thought streams and looking for the future. It's hard to believe our conference is coming to a close already. So inspiring so far. I know that my heart is encouraged, and some of the things that I'll share today, I think are real sparks from what has been shared so far. As was shared, I'm currently here at Washington State University, beaming in from Seattle, Washington, where our offices are located. And I've been here about a year and a half. Most of my work's been in Alaska, but I've been involved with food sovereignty and issues related to food and nutrition for many years, about 20 years working in tribal health. As Val shared so eloquently, I think the more you know and the more you do this work, the more you realize you don't know. And you know, to me, cultural humility is playing such a huge role as I continue to learn so much from all of our tribal nations, our elders. And the wisdom that I share today is credited to so many amazing teachers. My grandparents, Emil and Marina Gunderson, originally from the Aleutian region, and my mom, Kristen Ferguson, my grandparents, Clara and Hilton Ferguson in upstate New York. So I have such amazing resources that have helped me and informed me in the work that I do. As was shared, I'm a naturopathic physician, and as I share some introductory thoughts, one of the formative discussions around naturopathic medicine is that this concept of food is medicine, truly food is medicine. And when we think of that, I feel the alignment with my Indigenous roots as an enrolled member of the Kaagin-Tagugan tribe, growing up in a small fishing community in Southwest Alaska, where salmon was one of our main foods, and also living off the land. And knowing how to do that, I credit to the elders and also this collective wisdom that we had as kids growing up, even the plants that were medicinal. And I feel really fortunate to have grown up with that kind of environment. And now as an urban native, I value the collective wisdom now that we have in the Seattle area and all the tribes that are here. There is such wisdom, and this whole movement of reclaiming our traditional medicines, our traditional foods, our Indigenous ways of knowing, I feel it's grown exponentially in the last 10 years, and it continues to inspire. And I feel when we look at health outcomes and when we look at the future, this is where it's at. I think of some of the discussions in Alaska related to what does the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act have to do with food sovereignty? It's innately a part of our traditions, our cultures, our ways of living off the land, our traditional customary foods. And with resource development, of course, many of our nations across the country are facing these huge challenges from oil pipelines to other resource extraction in industries. Even in Alaska, there's been fighting between tribes and native corporations over land and resource development and food systems and our medicines, our traditional ways of knowing, our hunting grounds, our fishing grounds. And so I feel like this is an important discussion that is innately political. Policy, change in healthcare systems and access to these foods as medicine. I see a day when we'll have and in some health systems that are progressive, where you'll have a prescription for traditional foods. and certain kinds of cultural activities as a part of your healthcare plan. I see that in our future as we understand how our health is improved from reconnecting to our roots, our traditional foods and the cultures, our languages. When I finished medical school, I came back to Alaska and did work in my home region, Eastern Aleutian tribes. And I found out very quickly that a lot of the prescriptions that I would hope to have given patients related to food weren't available in the local food store. Many of our rural communities in Alaska are considered food deserts. And when we think of the challenge of living in those communities, folks are like, well, that's not available in my community. And, you know, how do I access that? Or it's super expensive, I can't afford it. And so what I had the honor of helping create is the Store Outside Your Door program, which originally was part of a research project with USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture funds. I credit Betsy Knobman, Jennifer Johnson, Desiree Jackson, who was a co-producer, and all of the folks at Alaska Tribal Health Consortium and South Central Foundation that helped us with some of those formative discussions. Chef Rob Kineen, and other amazing Alaska Native chefs, Melissa Burns, who helped us create these thought streams of what if we were to highlight how to hunt, fish, gather, and grow our own foods, and highlight our culture, our language, connecting our elders with our youth, and the importance of our cultural values. And so we created these webisodes or short videos that were designed for our shorter attention spans, unfortunately, of young families. And how do we create a terrain where our taste buds, how do we reclaim those taste buds, as was shared yesterday, that are formed very early on, maternal child development. We are a product of the foods that mom eats during pregnancy and our first food introductions. And so how do we start changing that so that more traditional foods are a part of our diets, and we start to reconnect not only with the food, but the stories, the connection with the environment, and the culture that food comes from. And so you can still access these webisodes. It's a movement that continues to grow exponentially, as I shared in shout out to the Native Nutrition Conference that's going to be in May, the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, and the amazing numbers of folks that continue to attend that conference. I was so impressed when I went there the first time, and there were 500 people. And for years, I felt like, you know, kind of like that lonely voice in a desert saying, this is important, food is important, our traditional foods and culture is like medicine. And now I no longer have to be that single or a voice of few. There are many of us now, and we're sharing this vision, and we're bringing it to our biomedical systems of care. And how do we integrate this into our healthcare systems as sovereign nations, and who own our own healthcare systems, many of us, and govern them? How can we have these available and have these prescriptions available? And moving beyond food insecurity to nutrition security, like how do we have access to these culturally appropriate foods and reconnect with them? This concept of we are what we eat goes deep into our traditional cultural values, that the energy of the food is important, and these foods that are highly processed and have high shelf life are often the foods that we grew up on, Spam and Pile Boy crackers. And, you know, not to, you know, demonize any food. I think all food can be good, but I feel like many of us have grown up with these foods that become comfort foods, and their energy is low. And so we wonder why we suffer from chronic disease. When we think of food sovereignty, the definition, the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and the right to define their own food and agriculture system, as quoted by the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. What does that really mean, and how do we move that forward? How do we bring our values into that, and how do we address the political and social challenges that, you know, these colonized worldviews? And even in our educational systems, we have constraints related to the funding and best practices and evidence-based. And how do we create new ways of describing these community best practices and ways that we've been in harmony with the land for millennia? and the understanding that the forest is our garden. And in Alaska, we don't do a lot of agriculture traditionally. As Indigenous peoples, we live off the land and in harmony with the land and the food systems, but climate change is affecting our food system. And so how do we adapt to that environmental challenge in our migration patterns and our changing food system and new opportunities? Where are the new opportunities? I've been greatly inspired over the years by Valarie Segrest and Elise Crone, who has already been shared, Elizabeth Campbell, others here in the Pacific Northwest who are front runners in creating curricula for us to draw upon and adapt to our own environments, our culture camps, and our ways that we're educating our next generation of young people. And the quote from yesterday by Ade, opening us up in a good way, Indigenous food sovereignty is about reclaiming our children and reconnecting them to these incredible ways of knowing. And some of the formative work with the Center for Alaskan Health Research, Dr. Jerry Mohat and others, who showed that those of us who participate in cultural activities, dance, language, traditional foods, that we have less risk behavior and higher degrees of resilience. The science is there. And now how do we bring it forward into our health systems and funding streams so we prioritize this? As a leader in nonprofits for years, we look at our budgets, and your budget is your priority statement. And what does it say? If it's not in your budget, it's not a priority. And I feel like as tribal nations and as healthcare systems, we need to put our money where our mouth is and really, really fund these things that we know really move the dial. Our culture camps are ways that we gather and celebrate our traditional foods, and our community gardens, ways that we have better access to these traditional foods. And as we look at changing the conversation on food economies, as Austin so eloquently shared, we need to decolonize that whole thought system. And how do we look at our resources, that we're in this together truly? And as we look at a climate change model, we're all connected, and what affects you is affecting me and all of our tribal nations. And we have these amazing streams of wisdom to share from our elders that we can draw upon, that we are to honor and respect the land, the sea, all living beings, that we're a part of a living system. And I feel like those Indigenous concepts can help inform all of our next chapters related to food and food security and nutrition security, as we reclaim those values and live more in harmony with our land and also with each other. And as I continue to be inspired, thank you to all of the speakers from yesterday and today. My heart is full. I've got lots of great sparks going on right now that will help inform my work here at the Washington State University's iReach, as well as I look forward to collaborating and doing more work and expanding the family of folks who are passionate about reclaiming our traditional foods, our traditional medicines, our ways of knowing, and understanding that these will help us to address those deeper roots of well-being for our future generations. I'll close with a quote by Dr. Rita Blumenstein, who has been a mentor and friend over the years. She's a traditional healer, tribal doctor, Yupik. She just moved into the spirit world this last year, and I continue to feel her wisdom and presence in what she has gifted us through her wisdom and through her teachings. She shares, "We are free to be who we are, to create our own life out of our past and out of the present. We are our ancestors. When we heal ourselves, we also heal our ancestors, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and our children. When we heal ourselves, we heal Mother Earth." Very profound words. And thank you, Dr. Rita, for blessing us with your presence, your wisdom, and it continues. Kagasakuk, thank you so much for allowing me to share a few words of wisdom that I credit to all those who have influenced me. And my heart goes out to all of you as we continue to do our best to stay healthy, to walk our talk. It takes a village, and it takes each one of us to take care of ourselves in that process too, so that we can make the most impact in this lifetime. Kagasakuk, have a great day, and thank you for attending the conference.
Dr. Ferguson, thank you so much. You did a nice summary for me. I appreciated all the opinions you picked in everything that you've heard from the past 2 days. Thank you so much. And I also just want to lift you like, yes, you're not alone anymore, right? Like being the only voice. And it's beautiful to see the interest, the love, the compassion, the passion itself of people wanting to do this and how important it is. And so I appreciate you sharing all of that. And also just leaving us some wisdom from a friend, right, who's no longer in this plane, but watching over us and doing the work up there to help us move the work down here. So thank you so much. All right. I want to thank everyone. So what I want to do actually is I'd like all the presenters to turn on their camera. If you all can turn on your camera, and if we can put down the slide. And we're going to visualize that all of our people, like the folks that are still with us, are here. So if you can take down the slides, it would be beautiful. And I'll just sort of close. So those that are here, that we can see your faces. Pam, Kara, I don't know if you're here, but what I'd love for us to do is put your hands up like this against the screen. And yes, up here on the side, like you're holding the box. So we're going to give each other a high five. And we're doing this for everybody who can see us. We are visualizing that you're also connected with us in this way. And as we're holding our hands up here, connecting with each other, thank you all for being here. We've learned so much. It starts with us. Starts with you taking care of yourself, what we're putting in our body, how we're listening to our body, how we're telling the stories in our communities, how we're telling the stories around the kitchen table with our children and our family, how are we educating our leadership, our community people, how are we questioning and pushing back in the community about whose data is this? Is this data blessed? Lifting those who sometimes don't get the light and the recognition and the spotlight, right? Continuing to push back when we're in a place where we're not seen, pushing to be at the table. We need to be at the table to have our voices heard. And so we're not alone. If we're up here holding each other, not feeling alone, that there's a whole community here that is willing to work with you, to help you, to inspire you, to continue to push forward. So much beautiful wisdom that we had for the past 2 days. We hope that the harvest will fuel you. My heart is full. My eyes is full, my ears are full. So thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate your attendance, and we are going to give you again another 8 minutes to transition to the next part of your day. So thank you very much. High five, tap, tap, tap. We'll see you all. Thank you so much. Take care.